In 1986, truck driver Michael Duarte vanished without a trace on a routine haul to Arizona. For decades, his family lived with silence until his son, Thomas, uncovered his father's buried rig in the New Mexico desert. Inside, a metal box, handwritten letters, and a Christmas gift still wrapped. What Thomas found unraveled a secret hidden for 34 years and revealed a truth no one was ready to believe. The cold wind from the Rockies cut through the quiet neighborhood of Aurora, Colorado, that December morning in 1986. The sun had barely begun its climb above the frost-covered rooftops when Michael Duarte stepped out of the house, boots crunching softly on the gravel. His breath formed white puffs in the air as he glanced back at the small, one-story house that held his entire world. Inside, the muffled sound of a morning cartoon played while his kids argued about who got the last waffle. Evelyn, his wife of 12 years, was bustling in the kitchen, her profile visible through the curtain-draped window, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear with that same graceful motion he'd fallen in love with. Michael let out a breath that wasn't entirely from the cold. He stepped quietly into the garage, keys in hand, and walked past the family's old lawnmower and shelves of tools to a corner behind a tarp. Carefully, he knelt down, opened a dusty storage chest, and pulled out a wrapped box about the size of a shoebox. The red paper was slightly crinkled, but the bow was still tight. On the tag, in blocky handwriting, it read, "To Thomas, Christmas 1986. From Dad." He hesitated for a moment before tucking it behind an old blanket deep in the chest. Just in case, he whispered to himself. He had meant to give it to his youngest son the night before, but didn't want to ruin the surprise. And besides, he thought he'd be back in time. Michael climbed into his Kenworth cab, his second home on wheels, and fired up the engine. The dashboard flickered to life, and a familiar low rumble shook the metal frame. From the passenger seat, a stuffed rabbit, belonging to his daughter Lily, sat buckled in, a habit they'd made when she used to join him on weekend trips. He smiled faintly, touched the worn ear of the toy, and adjusted the mirror. Inside the house, Evelyn wiped her hands on a dish towel and came to the door just in time to see him backing out of the driveway. She waved, her lips pursed in that worried half-smile she gave every time he went out. He waved back, then rolled down the window. "I'll be back by the 23rd, Ev. We'll put the lights up together this time, I promise. Don't forget the turkey," she called. "And drive safe. The kids want to open presents with you here." "I wouldn't miss it," he said. And he meant it. The roads outside Denver were slick with morning frost. The CB radio buzzed occasionally with traffic updates and the occasional joke from another long-haul driver. Michael sipped lukewarm coffee from his thermos and turned the dial on the radio, landing on a station playing Bing Crosby's "I'll Be Home for Christmas." He chuckled softly. "Better be," he muttered. But as he merged onto I-70 heading west, a gnawing feeling settled in his gut. He'd had strange dreams lately, foggy images of roads that led nowhere, a voice he didn't recognize whispering warnings in the dark. Evelyn had mentioned she'd been waking up in a cold sweat, always with the same fear, that he wouldn't come back. They hadn't talked about it directly, but the tension hung around them like static. Still, Michael chalked it up to holiday stress. Halfway through Utah, he pulled over at a rest stop. Snow flurries began to dust the asphalt, and the sky darkened prematurely with storm clouds. He leaned back in his seat, massaging his temple. Something about this delivery felt different. The route was familiar. Denver to Flagstaff was one of his regular runs, but the dispatch came last minute with a note that the client had new loading instructions. He didn't like surprises. He reached into the glove box, pulled out a worn Polaroid photo of his family, and stared at it for a long while. Thomas, all of 6 years old, grinning with missing front teeth. Lily, 8, clutching her rabbit like it was armor. Evelyn, sun in her hair, laughing at something just out of frame. Michael pressed the picture to his lips. "Keep the fireplace warm, all right?" That night, as he passed the Arizona border, the snow turned to rain. He pulled into a motel just outside of Winslow, booked a room with cash, and made a note in his logbook. Then, in the yellow motel lamp's dim glow, he wrote 3 short letters, one to Evelyn, one to each of the kids, sealed them in envelopes, and marked the outside, in case. The next morning, Michael was gone. The room was clean, bed made, no signs of struggle. His truck, however, was no longer in the lot. Witnesses say they saw him drive off just before dawn, heading south toward the mountains. He never made it to Flagstaff. No highway patrols spotted the truck. No GPS ping. Just gone. Back in Aurora, Evelyn waited with Coco and two sleepy children in Christmas pajamas. By the 24th, she called dispatch. By the 26th, she called the police. By January 3rd, she filed a missing person report. And in the garage, behind the old blanket in the storage chest, the gift still waited. The morning after Michael Duarte left the motel in Winslow, a thin gray fog clung to the horizon as his Kenworth was supposed to be pulling into Flagstaff's warehouse. The delivery manifest, time-stamped at 8 a.m., was waiting with a forklift crew already prepping the dock. They waited for 30 minutes, then an hour. When no truck arrived by 10 o'clock, the shift manager, Dave Lomax, started calling dispatch in Denver. "Where the hell is Duarte?" he asked. "He's never late." The voice on the other end was just as confused. "He checked out from the Winslow drop just after 4 o'clock this morning. Nothing since." The warehouse crew chalked it up to mechanical trouble. Maybe the old Kenworth broke down in one of the mountain passes. But by nightfall, unease had settled in like dust on the warehouse floor. Meanwhile, Evelyn was beginning to feel the gnawing unease every trucker's spouse knows but never admits aloud. She called his pager 3 times that evening. No response. Not unusual. Michael sometimes didn't check in until the end of a haul. Still, by the following morning, when the house was still silent and there was no message waiting on the answering machine, something inside her twisted. By December 24th, Flagstaff Dispatch confirmed. Michael Duarte never made the delivery. Not only that, but there was no record of him stopping at any known way station between Gallup and Flagstaff. No gas purchase. No roadside service call. No thibet chatter. Evelyn's hands trembled as she held the receiver to her ear, the dispatcher's voice repeating the same flat phrase. "He disappeared somewhere along the route." She asked, "What do you mean, disappeared?" "I mean, he just vanished, ma'am." Authorities began piecing together his last known whereabouts. According to a motel clerk in Winslow, Michael left quietly, alone, before the sun rose. She remembered the creak of the truck engine and the rumble as it drove away into the pre-dawn dark. The last time anyone saw him was around 4:15 a.m. on December 23rd. He was heading west on I-40 toward Gallup, a 100-mile stretch of desert and scrubland that swallowed headlights like quicksand. Police traced his movements to a small diner on the outskirts of Gallup. A waitress named Lacey remembered him. Tired eyes but polite. Sat alone. Ordered coffee and a breakfast burrito. He left a $5 tip. That was at 6:03 a.m. After that, nothing. No one saw him leave. No one saw him get back into the truck. The surveillance camera in the parking lot had been broken for months. They searched for tire tracks, broken glass, oil stains, anything that might suggest a crash or detour. Search teams combed the stretch of road between Gallup and Flagstaff, but the terrain was vast, unpredictable, dotted with canyons, ravines, and miles of open desert. Helicopters scanned the arid landscape. Local ranchers were questioned. No one saw a damn thing. Evelyn kept calling hospitals, rest stops, local police departments. On Christmas morning, instead of opening presents, she sat in her kitchen with a notebook, scribbling names and phone numbers and crossing them out, one by one. Lily asked where Daddy was. Evelyn didn't have an answer. The following week, Michael's company officially reported him missing. His route was marked in red on the dispatch maps. Drivers whispered about it on the CB channels, calling it the ghost line. Rumors began to stir. Hijacking, cartel activity near the border, even old desert legends of cursed roads and disappearances. But nothing concrete ever emerged. The Kenworth was gone. Not stripped, not burned, not crashed, just gone. Insurance sent an adjuster. She took notes, photographs of Michael's logbook, and Evelyn's shaky testimony. "Did your husband ever talk about being followed? Threatened?" she asked. Evelyn shook her head no, but there had been that one night, 2 weeks before he left, when Michael had double-locked the front door, then sat on the porch until after midnight, staring at the street like it owed him an answer. By January, the case turned cold. The truck's GPS system had malfunctioned weeks earlier. Michael had complained about it, even requested a replacement that never arrived. No coordinates. No emergency signal. He was simply gone. Friends and neighbors dropped off meals. The children returned to school. Evelyn wore the same coat for days, pacing from room to room, replaying his last words over and over. I'll be back by the 23rd, Ev. But the days became weeks, and winter turned the front lawn into a brittle sheet of ice. On February 12th, nearly 2 months after Michael's disappearance, the sheriff's department held a press conference. A microphone crackled under the gymnasium lights as the sheriff gave a summary. Michael Duarte, age 38, last seen December 23, 1986. No signs of foul play. No vehicle found. We're continuing to investigate. If anyone has information, please contact, but the rest was drowned by the rustle of news cameras and whispers from reporters hungry for mystery. Evelyn sat in the back, staring down at her hands. On her wrist, a hair-thin crack had formed in her watch's glass. She hadn't noticed it until now. She wondered if it broke. When she dropped it the night she got the call from dispatch. She wondered if Michael had noticed it before he left. As weeks turned into months, and months into a year, the absence became normal. A photo of Michael remained on the mantel, smiling, holding Thomas on his shoulders, but dust began to gather on its edges. Evelyn kept his coat hung by the door. She told herself it was so she wouldn't forget. But truthfully, it was so she could smell him sometimes, even as the scent slowly faded. No credit cards were used. No new bank activity. No one claiming to be Michael Duarte ever showed up at a hospital or border station. Not a single piece of clothing, not a bowl from the truck, was ever found. It was as if the desert had inhaled deeply and swallowed him whole. And yet, 3 states away, in the dry heart of southern New Mexico, a park ranger named Jesse Franklin would, 33 years later, stumble upon a glint of red beneath a landslide deep inside the desolate Oregon mountains, where no commercial truck was ever supposed to go. The spring of 1987 came late to Colorado, and with it a slow thaw that did little to ease the cold that had settled inside Evelyn Duarte's bones. Her husband had now been missing for 3 months, and the police no longer called. There were no updates, no new leads, and her phone only rang when the school nurse needed to talk about Lily's quiet spells or when a bill collector asked about late mortgage payments. She began to sell things, not just to keep the lights on, but to fund the search. First, it was Michael's toolbox, then their second-hand sedan. Eventually, the house itself went on the market. It sold quickly, too quickly, as if fate had been waiting to clear the stage. Evelyn took the children and moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of town, a place that smelled of bleach and old carpet, where the heater hissed at night and the upstairs neighbors never seemed to sleep. But it gave her access to something she needed, distance from the sympathetic looks, the casseroles, and the whispers behind closed doors. In the months that followed, Evelyn exhausted every avenue she could think of. She wrote to trucker forums, contacted private investigators in New Mexico and Arizona, and appeared on a local news segment where she held up Michael's photo and spoke directly into the camera. If you see my husband, please. Anything, even if it's nothing. She kept a file in the kitchen drawer labeled MD, filled with receipts, photocopies of maps, printouts from roadside diner logs, handwritten notes from people who thought they might have seen someone who looked like him. One claimed Michael was spotted in El Paso working under an alias. Another said he'd been taken by traffickers across the border. One letter, no return address, simply read, "He knew too much." Each new thread unraveled into silence. Each new hope ended in the same cul-de-sac. She spent evenings sitting on the apartment balcony, smoking the occasional cigarette despite never having been a smoker before, just watching the horizon, as if somehow Michael might roll back and behind the wheel of his Kenworth, smile sheepishly, and say something about engine trouble. By the time the first anniversary of his disappearance came, Evelyn had lost 20 pounds and most of her sense of time. December arrived like a slow, cruel echo. She bought a small fake Christmas tree and placed it in the corner of the living room, stringing lights while the kids watched, unsure whether they were allowed to feel festive. Thomas asked, "Should we wait for Dad to put the star on top?" Evelyn froze. Her voice came out too quickly. "No, sweetie. Let's let you do it this year." On Christmas Eve, she set the table with 3 plates, but left the 4th empty. At first, it was just instinct, like leaving a porch light on. But the kids noticed. "That's Daddy's seat," Lily whispered. Evelyn nodded. "Yes, it's for him, in case he comes back and he's hungry." It became a tradition. Every year after that, no matter where they lived or how little they had, Evelyn always saved a chair for Michael on Christmas Eve. She cooked his favorite side dish, mashed potatoes with too much butter, and folded a napkin on his plate like he was due any minute. Years passed. Lily grew tall and thin, took to sketching dresses and sewing buttons onto old clothes. Thomas played with wires and light bulbs, taking apart broken radios and putting them back together just to feel useful. Evelyn worked 3 jobs at one point: waitress, substitute librarian, night clerk at a storage unit facility. She kept Michael's flannel shirt in the closet, washed and ironed every Sunday. Once in 1992, she thought she saw him. She had taken the kids to a roadside fair outside Albuquerque, and while standing in line for funnel cake, she caught a glimpse of a man with the same walk, the same tilt of the head. She pushed through the crowd, calling his name, heart pounding like it was trying to break out of her chest. But when she reached him, the man turned, and it wasn't Michael. He smiled, confused, and she apologized, flustered, shaking all over. Thomas asked what happened. Evelyn said she'd dropped her wallet. That night, back at the motel, she cried into the scratchy pillow and made no sound. That same year, she received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a children's book, The Little Blue Truck. It was the same one Michael used to read to Thomas. No note. No explanation. She searched the envelope for fingerprints, kept it in a Ziploc bag in the back of her sock drawer, stared at it for weeks. Was it a cruel prank? Or a sign? She never told the kids. By 1996, 10 years had passed since the last time Michael was seen. The file marked MD had grown thicker, heavier with layers of loss. The pages were yellowed, the staples rusted, the edges curled. The police stopped responding altogether. The world had moved on. Evelyn had not. She no longer smoked. She took walks every evening through the park where she and Michael once picnicked on their 3rd anniversary. She bought a disposable camera each Christmas and left it on Michael's empty plate, just in case. She never remarried. A man named Howard from work once brought her coffee and asked her out to dinner. She thanked him and declined. She wasn't waiting. She insisted. She was remembering. One evening in early 1999, while cleaning the closet, she found an old key ring with Michael's initials etched on the back. It had fallen behind the shoe rack, buried beneath years of dust. She held it to her chest, sat down on the floor, and whispered, "Where are you?" Thomas, now a teenager, watched her from the hallway. He didn't say anything. They never talked much about Michael anymore, but the silence said enough. He had learned how to fix broken clocks and rig toy motors to run on solar panels. He told his mother he wanted to be an engineer. The Christmas chair remained, always at the same place on the table, always untouched. And in the desert, hundreds of miles away, something rusted and long buried waited beneath layers of time and sand, silent but intact, as if it too had kept holding its breath. Thomas Duarte had spent most of his adult life trying to forget the sound of diesel engines. He lived alone in a modest 2-bedroom house on the outskirts of El Paso, Texas, surrounded by blueprints, wires, and shells of half-finished projects that never quite held his attention long enough. At 39, he was a mechanical engineer for a municipal water facility, competent, methodical, and respected, but inwardly always adrift. He rarely spoke of his father, though people around him knew not to ask. If you dug far enough into his past, you'd find the obituary for a man who was never declared dead, only missing, and a newspaper clipping of a boy holding a toy truck while staring blankly at the camera. That boy had become this man, quiet, neat, with an undercurrent of constant fatigue behind his eyes. Every few months, he had the same dream. It always began with the sound of gravel under heavy wheels, a slow and echoing crunch that set the tone for what was to come. In the dream, he stood in the middle of an endless desert, flat, dry, blindingly white. The air was heavy, not with heat, but with stillness, the kind of emptiness that hummed inside your ears. Before him, partially buried in sand and tilted onto its right side, was a red Kenworth W900, the exact model his father had driven when he vanished in 1986. The windshield was cracked, the door slightly ajar, as if someone had tried to get out but never finished the motion. There were no footprints, no sound, no birds, no wind, only the truck and the pressure in his chest that grew every time he approached it. He never made it to the cab. Always, just as he reached for the door handle, he would wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, the metallic scent of diesel inexplicably filling his nostrils. He had told no one about the dreams. Not his mother, not Lily, not the therapist he briefly saw in his 20s before deciding no one could explain what had been left unsaid for decades. He didn't remember much from the day his father disappeared. Just a vague sense of confusion, like a skipped page in a picture book. One day his father was there, whistling in the garage, lifting him onto his shoulders, and the next, he was just a shadow in old photographs and a plate at the Christmas table that no one touched. Thomas had once tried to talk to his mother about it during high school, asked whether she believed his dad was still alive. Evelyn had closed her eyes and said, "I think part of him is still out there, waiting to be found." That phrase had nested itself deep in his brain. Over the years, it evolved from a comforting thought to a haunting code. He started collecting articles on desert crashes, abandoned vehicles, skeletal remains found by hikers. It became a private ritual every month, late at night, scrolling through reports, comparing terrain maps, tracing highways on physical maps he pinned to the wall of his home office. His colleagues thought he was obsessed with logistics. In truth, he was triangulating grief. One afternoon in June 2019, Thomas was working on a water flow recalibration system when his coworker, Jason, handed him an article from the El Paso Times. "Hey, thought this might interest you," he said casually. The headline read, "Unidentified vehicle discovered in Franklin Mountains after rockslide." Thomas's fingers clenched the edge of the page. The article mentioned a partial license plate and a make, Kenworth W900, his father's model. The location was remote, too remote for any long-haul route, but the description hit something primal in Thomas. He excused himself, went into the break room, and stared at the grainy photo for 10 minutes, as if willing it to become clearer. That night, the dream came back, more vivid than ever. This time, there was a detail he'd never noticed before, a sticker on the side of the truck's cab. A white rabbit. It was the same one that had been on the toy his sister used to carry around. He hadn't seen it in 30 years, but in the dream, it was unmistakable. The rabbit stared out from the rusted paint like a frozen witness. He called his mother the next day. She sounded tired but sharp as always. When he mentioned the article, there was a long pause on the line. "I saw it," she said. "I wasn't going to tell you. I didn't want you to get pulled back in." "I was never out," he replied. "I don't think I ever will be." She didn't argue. Thomas took a few vacation days, packed a bag with gloves, a flashlight, a first aid kit, and a copy of the police report from 1986. He drove toward the base of the Franklin Mountains where the ranger had allegedly found the debris. When he arrived, the access road was closed due to ongoing geological instability. He parked anyway, strapped on a hiking pack, and began climbing. The higher he went, the more familiar everything felt, as if he had been there before, not in this life, but in some other echo of memory. He followed no trail, only intuition and fragments of dream logic. After 4 hours of climbing, he reached a narrow plateau where the sunlight fell at a hard angle. And there, hidden beneath a slab of displaced rock and decades of sand, he saw it. A glimpse of red. He dropped to his knees, brushing aside debris with trembling hands. The paint was flaking, the chrome dulled by time, but the shape was unmistakable. A Kenworth. And on the passenger side door, faded but still visible, the outline of a white rabbit. He staggered backward, overwhelmed. The desert buzzed with silence, broken only by his own ragged breath. Thomas reached for his phone to call someone, anyone, but stopped. He needed a moment, needed a look. He moved toward the cab, heart pounding louder than the wind. The passenger door was jammed, but the driver's side gave slightly when he pulled. The creak of rusted hinges sounded like a scream in the stillness. Inside, everything was as it should not be, too intact, too preserved, like the vehicle had been sealed away from time. And on the dashboard, next to the cracked steering wheel, something glinted beneath a layer of dust. Thomas leaned in, brushing it off carefully. It was a photo, old, curled at the edges, showing a man in his 30s holding two laughing children in front of a Christmas tree. The man wore a flannel shirt. Thomas's hands began to shake. He pulled the photo close, saw his own missing teeth, Lily's rabbit in her arms. His father's arm wrapped tightly around them. Behind the photo, stuck in the vent, was a folded piece of paper yellowed with age. His name was written on it in handwriting he hadn't seen since the last time he opened a birthday card in 1986. Thomas didn't move. He didn't breathe. And in the back of his mind, the dream began to replay again. Only now, he was no longer standing in the desert alone. Thomas hadn't yet shared the photo or the note he found in the abandoned truck with anyone. For weeks, he kept them locked in a drawer in his home office, opening it late at night like a shrine, staring at the handwriting until it blurred. He wanted answers, but he didn't know where to start. The terrain near the Franklin Mountains was unstable, and officials, when informed of the find, had dismissed it at first as a leftover wreck from an old mining transport. But something gnawed at him, the dream, the rabbit sticker, the way the truck seemed perfectly preserved by time. Then, in the spring of 2020, just as the country was slipping into chaos and isolation, Thomas's phone rang at 3:12 a.m. The caller ID showed U.S. Border Patrol. He answered with a voice still thick from sleep, thinking it was a mistake. But the voice on the other end was calm and clear. Mr. Duarte, this is Officer Rendon with the New Mexico Border Patrol. We believe we found something that may be connected to a cold case you're familiar with. Thomas sat upright. What kind of something, he asked. Rendon continued. Last week, during an unrelated aerial sweep near the Las Uvas Mountains, we spotted some irregular terrain on drone footage. We sent a ground team. They found what appears to be a Kenworth chassis, possibly from the 1980s, buried in a canyon crevice outside Las Cruces. Thomas's heart began to hammer. Kenworth, he repeated. Yes, sir. Red. Partially rusted, but mostly intact. There's evidence the vehicle was pushed or slid down into the crevice decades ago. The serial number's worn off, but we're doing what we can to trace it. He barely slept after that call. He drove to Las Cruces the next day, arriving before sunrise. The excavation site was remote, far from any paved road, surrounded by rock walls and dry brush that crackled underfoot. A temporary tent had been erected nearby, and two men in Border Patrol jackets stood beside a flatbed tow truck. One of them waved as Thomas approached. You Duarte? Yes, he replied, trying not to sound breathless. They led him down a slope where a portion of red-painted steel protruded from the dirt, like a bone unearthed in an archaeological dig. He recognized the front grille immediately. Despite the damage, the emblem was unmistakable. Kenworth. The team spent hours carefully clearing the site. As more of the vehicle came into view, it became evident that this wasn't a typical crash. The truck wasn't crumpled like it had rolled violently. It looked as though it had been deliberately wedged into the crevice, like someone wanted it hidden. The cab had taken damage, but remained largely sealed. Thomas stood in stunned silence as the winch began lifting the body of the truck from its shallow grave. Decades of dirt and rust peeled away, revealing the ghost of a time long gone. The door on the driver's side groaned open under pressure, and the stench of time, oil, mildew, decay spilled into the air. Inside, the seats were torn and brittle, the dashboard cracked, but Thomas noticed something glinting near the floorboard under the steering column. One of the agents called over a forensic tech. They crouched, shining flashlights. There's a false panel, the tech muttered. Looks like something was welded into the floor. The welds were rough but intentional, forming the outline of a rectangular metal case. It was embedded into the floor, flush with the contours of the cap. "We're going to have to cut it out," Rendon said. "Won't know what's in there until we get it back to the lab." Thomas watched as they carefully sliced through the panel. Sparks flew in short bursts, and the smell of heated metal filled the space. Eventually, the box came free, a heavy, scuffed metal container, sealed on all sides, with no markings except for a tiny engraved cross on the lid. The techs exchanged glances. "That's custom work," one said. "Definitely not factory standard." The box was cold to the touch. They moved it to a secure table under the tent. Thomas hovered close, his breath catching in his throat. He didn't know what he expected: evidence, closure, maybe even bones, but the silence around the table was reverent, as if everyone sensed the weight of what was about to be uncovered. The team began to cut the seal. One edge hissed open. The top popped slightly from pressure inside. Thomas leaned forward. Inside the box, cushioned in layers of foam and wrapped in plastic, were several objects. The first was a sealed envelope marked, "For Evelyn Duarte." The second, another marked, "Thomas, open only when you're ready." The third was a folded note, "Emergency, if something happens." Beneath the letters lay a bundle of old photos, yellowed with age. Thomas reached out, his hand shaking. One photo showed his father standing beside the Kenworth, smiling, holding what looked like a small box, the same one now lying before him. Another photo showed Evelyn, much younger, holding baby Thomas in front of the family home. But what made Thomas gasp wasn't the photos. It was what lay beneath them, a thick manila envelope marked in fading ink, "Client Ledger, Route Changes." Inside were hand-drawn maps, notes scribbled in his father's handwriting, and a list of delivery routes with dates and unfamiliar names. The last item in the box was a small, battered cassette tape labeled Christmas 1986. The agents looked at him. "Want to hear it?" Thomas nodded slowly. One of them grabbed a portable player. The tape slid in, clicked. Static. Then a voice. "Hey, buddy, if you're hearing this, well, I guess something went wrong." The voice was unmistakable. Michael Duarte. The sound of it slammed into Thomas like a tidal wave. "I recorded this the night before I left," the voice continued. "Things were getting strange. I noticed some men following me on a couple halls. Heard chatter on the radio I didn't like. I was going to quit after this run. Be home in time to put the star on the tree. If I didn't make it back, I wanted you to know I didn't leave you. I would never do that." The tape cut off with a loud click. Thomas stood motionless, tears brimming in his eyes. The air around him felt charged, thick with things unsaid. He looked back at the metal box, the letters, the photos. And in his chest, something shifted, a long-held breath finally threatening to escape. The metal box sat heavily on the table inside the tent, as if the decades it had spent buried had infused it with the weight of time itself. Thomas stared at the contents as the forensic team carefully laid them out, gloved hands moving with reverence, almost ritualistic. One by one, they removed the envelopes, placing each on a fresh white cloth. The first was slightly wrinkled. The ink faded into a soft brownish hue, but the name Evelyn was still clear and unmistakably written in Michael's hand. The second envelope bore Thomas's name, written in a larger, steadier script as if Michael had taken particular care. The third was heavier, sealed in wax, with a blunt, ominous note across the top. To be opened only if something happens. Beneath the letters was a zippered pouch filled with cash, American bills aged but still crisp, folded neatly and wrapped with a rubber band. There were also several black and white photographs, edges curled, some with handwritten dates on the back. The top one was of their old house in Aurora, the red shutters, the maple tree in front, the swing where Lily used to sit. Another showed Evelyn in profile, laughing, unaware she was being photographed. The last image was of Thomas and Lily on Christmas morning, sitting in their pajamas, surrounded by wrapping paper, their father's arm reaching in from the edge of the frame like a ghost refusing to let go. Thomas didn't touch anything at first. He sat motionless, trying to swallow the knot rising in his throat. The sun above Las Cruces was beginning to dip, casting long shadows that crawled across the canvas walls of the tent. Officer Rendon stood back, arms crossed, letting him take the lead. "Whenever you're ready," he said softly. Thomas picked up the envelope addressed to his mother, running his finger along the seal. He knew instinctively it wasn't his to open. He slipped it into his jacket pocket for safekeeping, a bridge between past and present waiting to be delivered. Then he turned to his own letter. His name looked younger, somehow, like Michael had written it while still thinking of him as a boy, not the grown man now trembling at the edge of revelation. He opened the envelope with care, unfolding the paper slowly. The writing inside was tight, slanted, hurried in places. "Thomas, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it back. And I need you to know first and foremost, it wasn't by choice. I wanted nothing more than to walk through that front door, toss my keys on the counter, and hug you until you pushed me away. I wanted to grow old with your mother. I wanted to teach you how to drive, how to shave, how to fix things. But life had other plans." Thomas's hands trembled. He blinked, forcing himself to continue. "Before my last delivery, I started noticing strange things. Unmarked cars near the depot. My route being changed last minute. People on the radio I didn't recognize using code words I wasn't trained to hear. Then one night, someone left a note in my truck. No signature. It just said, 'Keep quiet if you want to stay whole.' I was scared. Not for me, but for you, for your mom. I decided to take one last job, get the paycheck, then quit for good. I had no idea I'd be writing this instead." Thomas paused, his chest tight, heart thudding against his ribs. He looked around, the faces of the officers and techs still, watching him, the desert wind whispering through the tent flaps. He continued reading. "I left this box hidden because I needed to leave something behind. Proof. If someone found it, they'd know I didn't just walk away. There are people who will lie, who will tell you it was an accident, a breakdown, or worse, that I ran. Don't believe them. If you're reading this, son, it means they didn't let me come home. I love you. I always have. You were the best thing I ever helped make." Tears slipped silently down Thomas's face. He folded the letter back into the envelope, held it to his chest, and sat with it for several minutes, letting the weight of the words settle into his bones. Then he turned to the last envelope. It was heavier, more ominous. The seal cracked as he peeled it open. Inside was a single page, written in Michael's handwriting, but darker, more rushed. The words spilled across the paper like panic. "If you're reading this, it's because something has gone terribly wrong. I had suspicions about what I was carrying. I didn't want to look, but curiosity got the better of me. There were no manifests, no addresses, just sealed crates and cash. I think I was being used as a mule, unknowingly. The moment I confronted my supervisor, he stopped taking my calls. 2 nights before I left, someone tried to break into our house. They left no signs, but I knew. I felt it. If this box is found, they'll want it destroyed. They'll want my name forgotten. Don't let them. Protect your mother. Get out of Aurora if you have to. Tell no one until you're safe. And remember, if someone tells you I abandoned you, they're lying. I chose you. I chose all of you. I just didn't get to make it back." The note ended abruptly. No signature. No farewell. Just a jagged underline beneath the final sentence. Thomas sat back, the air thick and dry in his lungs. The sun had fully set now, and the lights from the generator buzzed overhead. In the box, under the stack of letters, the bundle of money, and the photographs, was one more item, a tiny brass key taped to the underside of the lid. Thomas pulled it free, holding it in his palm. He didn't know what it unlocked. Not yet. But his father had left it for a reason. A final breadcrumb on a trail long, thought cold. And somewhere, beneath the layers of revelation, another truth still waited in the dark. The desert had gone still by the time Thomas returned to the truck cab under the pale glow of portable floodlights. The forensic crew had finished their preliminary work and stepped away, leaving him with what remained of the past, a fractured capsule of his father's final hours. The silence inside the cab felt sacred, heavy with intention, as if the air itself remembered every breath Michael Duarte took before vanishing. The metal floor was scuffed and rusted, the seat cushions brittle and flaking, but Thomas noticed something the investigators had missed. Near the driver's seat, wedged under a broken panel, was a seam barely visible, a hand-cut slit in the vinyl padding just behind the center console. He slid his fingers beneath it and felt something cold, rectangular, and heavy. With a careful tug, he pulled out a small black device caked in dust. It was a GPS unit, but not standard issue. It was older, bulkier, with a modified antenna and a taped label on the back that read MK route. His breath caught. He remembered helping his dad tinker with radios as a boy, recalled how Michael once said, "Always keep a backup no one knows about." Trucks aren't just metal, they're stories with wheels. Thomas stepped back out into the night and handed the device to one of the agents. "Can this still be read?" he asked. The tech examined it, turned it over, and nodded. "With the right adapter, maybe. It's old, but the casing's sealed. Might have survived." They took it back to the mobile lab and plugged it into a converter. After several tense minutes, a series of blinking coordinates began to scroll across the screen. The last signal pinged just outside a restricted area near the New Mexico border. It had been logged at 5:43 a.m. on December 23, 1986, the exact day Michael disappeared. But the device had stored more than just one ping. The history revealed an odd route taken in the weeks prior to that final delivery. Multiple detours in zones not listed on Michael's manifest. Sudden stops near unmarked warehouses and roadside pull-offs nowhere near usual shipping lanes. As they cross-referenced the coordinates, it became clear Michael had been rerouted several times, off the books, and not by mistake. Inside the truck cab, Thomas noticed more signs of modification. The glove compartment had been reinforced from the inside. The dashboard vents were misaligned, like they'd been tampered with. He crouched beneath the driver's seat and found more evidence. Electrical tape, wire ends, a broken microphone piece. Michael had clearly been recording something, maybe even transmitting, but what? And to whom? The cassette tape still looped in Thomas's mind. Unmarked crates, people on a radio. I didn't recognize code words. He remembered his father's voice cracking slightly at the phrase, "I decided to take one last job," and now it was all making sense. Michael hadn't just stumbled into danger. He had been pushed. Later that night, as Thomas sat under the tent again, he opened the remaining pages from the emergency letter. In shaky but still controlled script, Michael had written, "3 weeks before Christmas, they changed my route. Told me I'd be doing a special run. No manifest, no questions. Said it came from higher up. When I refused, the threats started subtle. Missed payments, radio interference. Then a stranger showed up at the gas station near Gallup. Just stared at me. Didn't say a word. Next day, someone slashed my back tire. I didn't report it. Didn't think they'd believe me. I made my own tracker. You'll find it under the seat. If you got this letter, maybe you already have." Thomas folded the paper, the edges trembling in his grip. The sense of dread in his chest had transformed into something else, urgency. He realized now his father had been caught in something deeper, darker than a simple disappearance. One of the techs approached again. "You'll want to see this," he said, pointing to a computer monitor. The GPS track didn't just end near the border. It passed briefly through a government-owned logistics facility known to law enforcement as a blind spot for undocumented shipments. No surveillance footage. No employee records ever made public. And then nothing. No signal. Just a dead stop until the Kenworth's remains were found decades later. Thomas leaned in, zooming in on the coordinates. "What's this location?" "It's fenced federal land," the agent replied. "Border utility access. At least on paper. But we've had reports, unsanctioned movements. Never enough to act on." The more Thomas dug, the more pieces fit. He went back into the truck, reopened the toolbox, and found a notebook hidden in the cavity behind the seatbelt panel. Pages filled with shorthand, symbols, and names. Some of them were crossed out. Others were circled in red ink. One page stood out, dated December 17th, 1986. Offered $2,000 to keep quiet. Declined. Told up to keep door locked. Saw white van again. Thomas swallowed hard. The white van. The visitor at the gas station. The rewired truck systems. His father hadn't been paranoid. He'd been hunted. And still, even knowing what he knew, Michael had gone forward with the delivery. Why? The brass key Thomas had found in the box earlier now burned in his pocket. He pulled it out again, turned it over. Stamped on the side were 3 digits, 317. It didn't match anything on the truck, not the safe, not the toolbox. But Michael had made sure it survived. Thomas stepped away from the cab, the cold air pressing against his face. Somewhere in the tangle of memories, coordinates, and fear, there was more. His father had left one final thread, and Thomas was ready to follow it. The wind outside the tent had picked up by the time Thomas stepped back into the cab of the Kenworth. The beams of artificial light flickering slightly with each gust, casting long skeletal shadows through the broken windows. He had already discovered the letters, the GPS unit, and the hidden notebook filled with notes that now felt less like records and more like warnings written by a man who knew his days were numbered. But something still pulled at him, a subtle intuition telling him that the truck, this relic of silence and sand, had not yet finished speaking. He lowered himself onto the cracked driver's seat, running his hands over the dashboard, over the dented glove compartment, searching not for electronics or answers, but for presence. His fingers stopped at a corner beneath the passenger side dash, where a seam in the lining hinted at a false panel. He took out his multi-tool and wedged the blade gently beneath the edge, prying until the panel loosened and gave way with a soft pop. Behind it, tightly wedged in a cavity framed by foam and rusted bolts, was something wrapped in faded paper, the kind with snowflakes and reindeer printed in 1980s pastel colors. Thomas stared at it, unable to move at first. The paper had yellowed, but it was intact. A frayed ribbon circled the box, and taped to the top was a card. His hands trembled as he slid the package out, heart thudding not with fear, but something closer to grief, a sharp, aching recognition of something lost too long. He lifted the card and read the handwriting, still clear after all these years. To Thomas, Christmas 1986, love, Dad. His breath caught, the lump in his throat swelling until it became unbearable. The package was light, rectangular, maybe the size of a shoebox. The ribbon slipped through his fingers as he held it in his lap, staring at the words he never got to read as a child. Tears welled in his eyes as he remembered Christmas morning, 1986, how he and Lily had sat in front of the tree waiting, how Evelyn had tried to smile through her trembling hands, how the fourth plate had sat untouched on the table. The toy, it seemed, had never made a home, but it had never been forgotten. Thomas hesitated, then slowly began unwrapping the gift. The paper gave way like old leaves, crackling softly in his fingers. Inside was a remote-controlled toy truck, red and silver, shiny plastic now dulled by time, but still pristine in its packaging. He turned it over and saw a tiny sticker on the bottom, recommended for ages 6+. He had been 6. His father had planned it all, had bought it, wrapped it, and stowed it away, likely meaning to deliver it on his return from the route that would ultimately erase him from their lives. Thomas turned the box over, and something slid out from underneath the insert. Another note, smaller, folded once, and tucked inside like a secret meant only for him. He opened it carefully. "Buddy, this one's got your name all over it. We'll take it to the park when I get back. You drive. I'll chase. Merry Christmas, love, Dad." The paper shook in his grip. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and let out a breath that seemed to have waited 34 years to escape. For a moment, the world blurred around him. The tent, the investigators, the desert wind, all faded, and he was 6 again on the carpet, waiting for a knock that never came. But now he had this. Now he knew Michael hadn't forgotten. That even in the midst of fear and suspicion, even with people following him and secrets buried under his route, he had taken time to buy his son a gift, to wrap it, to leave it behind. He clutched the toy and note to his chest and sat there in silence, letting the weight of everything settle. Outside, the techs worked around the truck, but no one disturbed him. They sensed what the moment meant. Not everything had to be spoken aloud. Later, he placed the truck back into its box and resealed the paper as best he could, folding the ribbon inside and slipping the car between the folds. He knew he'd never play with it. It wasn't about the toy. It was about the proof, tangible, wrapped in Christmas paper, that his father had been trying to come home. as he returned to the tent with the package tucked under his arm. One of the forensic agents approached him quietly. "You might want to see what we pulled from under the steering column," she said. She led him to a small metal tray where a folded cloth revealed a key, shiny, brass, identical to the one Thomas had found inside the metal box. But this one had a number stamped into it, 317B. Thomas stared at it. "That's the same number as the one I found in the box," he said. The agent nodded. "We think it goes to a lockbox or a storage unit. There's an address scribbled on the inside of the dashboard panel. Could be where he meant to hide the rest." Thomas's mind began to spin again. His father hadn't just been recording evidence. He'd been building a trail. Not just for the police. For his family. For him. He stepped outside, the cold desert air brushing against his skin. He looked toward the horizon, where the stars had begun to appear, silent and constant. In his hand, the wrapped toy felt warm, even sacred. Another breadcrumb. Another step on the path his father had left behind. And somewhere in New Mexico, at an address long buried under layers of memory and dust, something else waited. The morning after discovering the wrapped toy, Thomas sat alone beneath the canvas of the field tent, cradling the envelope addressed to him in his father's handwriting. The night had been long, sleep refusing to come, his mind playing through every moment like a film strip. The buried truck, the photos, the GPS tracker, the scent of dust and diesel still clinging to his clothes. But this letter, he had not yet opened this one. The other note, the emergency instructions, had been like a flare fired into darkness. But this was different. This was meant only for him. A father writing to a son, not as a warning, but as something else. A confession, maybe, or goodbye. The paper crackled faintly as he unfolded it. His father's handwriting sloped across the page in steady lines. A few smudges suggesting tears, or perhaps the rush of writing under pressure. "Thomas, if this letter finds you, then something terrible happened. I want you to know right away I never meant to leave you. Not like that. I had plans, big ones. I was going to finish that December route, collect the last paycheck, and quit the road for good. I was tired. Not just tired of the driving or the hours or the loneliness, but tired of being away from you. I missed the little things. Watching cartoons together on Saturday mornings, walking you to school, teaching you how to check oil levels. I had this dream, this quiet little fantasy I clung to in the dark stretches of highway. I wanted to open a garage. Nothing fancy, just me, a few tools, maybe one or two guys I trusted, and you sitting out front with a lemonade stand in the summer, handing me wrenches when your hands got big enough." Thomas paused, wiping at his eyes, the letter already shaking in his grip. He could see it, that image so vivid it felt like a memory he never had. The sun over a gravel lot. A painted sign that read Duarte and Son. His father's flannel shirt. His own tiny hands gripping a socket wrench. Michael's words continued. "I knew I couldn't drive trucks forever. Your mom and I had talked about moving to a smaller place. I wanted to be home for every birthday, every scraped knee, every science fair. I even started saving. That envelope of cash, that wasn't an emergency stash. That was the start of the garage fund. But then came that job, no paperwork, no explanation, just an order from someone I didn't know. I said no, and things changed. I wish I'd walked away right then. I wish I'd come home, locked the door, and never answered the radio again." The page beneath his fingertips blurred. Thomas took a deep breath, then turned to the second sheet, his father's tone quieter now, more intimate. "I want to say I'm sorry, more than I ever thought I'd have to. I missed your 7th birthday. I missed the school play, the first time you rode your bike without training wheels. I missed watching you grow into the man you are now. But not a day went by that I didn't think of you. You need to know that. I didn't leave because I wanted to. I didn't vanish because I stopped caring. I thought I could finish the run and be back by Christmas. I wrapped your gift. I wrote the card. I even imagined your face when you opened it. That memory, the one I never got to have, that's what kept me alive in the dark moments. That hope." Thomas let out a sound, a strangled mix of laughter and pain. All his life, he had wondered what his father had thought in those final days. Now he knew. Michael had carried him, not just in thought, but in intention. The gift hadn't been an afterthought. It had been a promise, one he hadn't gotten the chance to fulfill. The letter continued, more fragmented now, the handwriting sloping slightly downward, as if fatigue had crept into the pen. Sometimes when I drove late at night and the highway was empty, I'd talk to you like you were in the seat next to me. I'd tell you what the stars looked like, how the clouds smell before rain. I imagined you asking questions. I imagined answering them. I'd say, Thomas, always check your mirrors before switching lanes. Thomas, don't trust anyone who can't look you in the eye. Thomas, when you fall, stand up like you mean it. I know it's not enough. I know I should have been there to say those things in person. But if this letter finds you, then at least you'll know they were said. Thomas held the paper to his chest, his pulse a drumbeat in his ears. The wind outside picked up, the flaps of the tent fluttering like a heartbeat. He could feel his father's presence, now not in mystery or absence, but in the rhythm of those words, the quiet certainty that Michael had loved him beyond measure. He read on, "You're probably a grown man now. I hope you have your mother's eyes and her heart. She was always the strong one. And Lily, I hope she never lost that fire. I regret not seeing you grow, but I believe in who you became. If you're reading this, then you've already done more than I ever could. You found the truck. You found me. That means everything." The last paragraph was short, a single sentence, written in darker ink, like it had been added later. "I love you, son." And I never stopped. Thomas folded the letter slowly, placing it back into the envelope, then into the inner pocket of his jacket, close to his chest. He stood and stepped outside the tent, the sky now painted with streaks of pink and orange, the desert horizon endless before him. The voices of the investigation team buzzed faintly in the background, but to Thomas, everything else had fallen silent. The truth was no longer questioned. It was written in ink and tears and cardboard, in GPS pings and diesel ghosts. He turned back to the truck, the last vessel of the man he had once called Dad. And just behind the driver's seat, beneath a hidden latch that creaked with age, something else waited. The restoration began slowly, piece by rusted piece, under the relentless New Mexico sun. Thomas partnered with a local garage in Las Cruces, just a handful of men who had once worked on long-haul trucks like his father's. He explained everything with caution at first, omitting names and details until trust was earned. But soon, word spread. The son of a missing driver was rebuilding the rig that vanished in 1986. Mechanics volunteered their time, retired drivers stopped by to offer stories, and townspeople donated materials, small bills, and even meals. The project took almost a year. Every inch of the Kenworth W900 was cleaned, sanded, and rebuilt where possible, preserving the original structure while breathing life back into what had become a time capsule of silence. The dent on the left side of the hood was left untouched, a deliberate scar kept as testimony. The White Rabbit sticker was replicated and reapplied to the passenger side door, just as Thomas remembered from his dreams. When the restoration was complete, Thomas didn't drive the truck. He mounted it onto a platform near the base of the Franklin Mountains, on the very land where it had been found. He built a small structure around it, half open air, half museum, and installed lighting that bathed the truck in soft gold at night. A plaque at the entrance read, "For those who left and never came back, for those still waiting, for the road that keeps secrets." Beneath it, a list of names began to grow. Other families reached out, stories surfaced, drivers who vanished, couriers who never delivered, vehicles found decades later in canyons and dried creek beds, all forgotten until now. The memorial, named the Mile Marker, became a destination, not a tourist spot, but a place of remembrance, a space where silence was no longer emptiness but reverence. Thomas didn't stop there. The discovery of his father's truck and the truths buried within had done more than fill a void. It had ignited something in him. Guilt gave way to purpose. Grief transformed into action. With the help of a former Border Patrol officer and a tech specialist from his water facility, he launched Miles of Silence, a nonprofit dedicated to finding and identifying people who went missing along U.S. border routes. The focus was not political. It was personal. Drivers, workers, travelers, migrants, anyone who vanished into the vast nowhere of the American Southwest. The organization began as a website and hotline. Then came the database, vehicle IDs, dispatch logs, known aliases, border crossing dates, regional rumors. Volunteers submitted drone footage, satellite maps, old CB radio recordings. Thomas hired researchers, former truckers, geospatial analysts. They dug into records buried under bureaucratic dust. In their first year alone, they identified 5 unmarked crash sites, 2 abandoned transport trailers, and reunited 3 families with long-lost answers. The organization became his life. He sold his house in El Paso, bought a small home closer to the memorial site, and turned one of the side buildings into an archive office. He kept his father's letters in a locked glass case there, not as relics, but as the cornerstone of what the movement stood for: memory over disappearance, legacy over absence. Every Christmas, Thomas laid a small red toy truck on the dashboard of the restored Kenworth. Each year, a new note joined it. Visitors began leaving their own, scribbled on paper, napkins, sometimes laminated, sometimes just rain-washed pencil. For Dad, still waiting. To the one we lost in '94. If you see this, know we haven't forgotten. Evelyn came to visit the memorial once. She stood silently in front of the truck, her hand resting on the cold metal, her eyes not crying but full. She didn't stay long. Before leaving, she placed a single white rose on the hood and whispered something only the truck could hear. Lily came later too, with her own children. She pointed at the name Michael Duarte etched in chrome and told them he was brave. He just didn't have time to tell the world. Thomas never remarried. He lived simply, pouring every hour into miles of silence. In quiet moments, he'd reread his father's letters, listen to the old cassette on a loop, or watch the desert light shift over the metal cab like a slow exhale. He never played with the remote-controlled toy truck, but he kept it on his desk, still in its wrapping paper, the note faded but legible. To Thomas, Christmas 1986, love, Dad. It reminded him that his father had been real. Not just a story, not just a missing person. A man with hopes, with plans, who had tried to come home. Over time, the organization expanded. Collaborations with other missing persons networks, partnerships with law enforcement, even international outreach. But no matter how far it grew, its heart remained in the desert, next to a restored truck that bore witness to a silence broken. Thomas knew he had fulfilled something, not just a mystery solved, but a legacy reclaimed. His father had once dreamed of building a garage to be closer to family. Thomas had built something larger, something permanent, a place where every mile traveled in uncertainty might one day find its echo. And every time the wind howled through the open canyons, he listened, hoping maybe, just maybe, a voice from 1986 might answer back. If this story moved you, consider liking and subscribing for more real-life, inspired mysteries like this one. What part of Michael's journey hit you the hardest? Was it the hidden GPS, the forgotten Christmas gift, or the final letter to his son? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and where in the world you're watching from. Your story might be closer to this one than you think.